Left and right. Okay, my mistake. With technology, you always make some mistakes, but that's okay. So in Croatia, until recently, this was a typical scene in the city streets. All the taxis were different cars, but there was just one organization. It was not a company, it was an association of taxi drivers. And they had the monopoly. This association was the only organization that was permitted to provide taxi service in Zagreb. A similar situation was in all other Croatian cities, Rijeka, Split, Osijek, etc., and also in most other Southeast European countries, but in many countries around the world as well. So, in Croatia specifically, a few years ago, this company came to Zagreb, and they were called Cameo Taxi. And all of a sudden, you could see some really big changes in how these taxis looked. So this is one of the photographs from the beginning when Cameo started. All the cars are the same, as you can see. And this is a very different organization. First of all, it was a private company. It was not an association of private individual members. And as a company, Cameo was able to get good leasing arrangements with banks. So they could buy the cars at a much lower price, but more importantly, Cameo was able to utilize the cars 24 hours a day. So the car belongs to the company still today, and for 8 hours or something like that, one taxi driver drives the car, and then he goes home, and then another one, and another one. So basically the car is used 24 hours a day. As you can see, the cars are clearly branded, so when the customer is in the street, he can very easily identify the car. And Cameo company introduced a pretty high level of service expectation from the drivers. So if you're a Cameo driver, you have to wear the nice white shirt, the nice tie, you have to be very nice with customers. This is all very, very different from what we were used to in Zagreb, because there were taxi drivers many of them were very famous for being very rude to the customers and saying, I want to drive you, I don't want to drive you, and even worse stuff. And obviously, what happens when a monopoly is endangered by some new competitor, there is a conflict. And indeed, we had lots of conflict in the Zagreb streets, actually physical conflicts, fights between the old drivers and the new drivers and stuff like that. But over time, Cameo persisted. And of course, the most important difference for the customers was their prices were much, much, much lower than the monopoly until then. So, if we start to talk about the business model, you can see some differences between the old association and Cameo. The old guys, each taxi driver was the owner of his car. He could only use it for 8 hours a day, and the costs for this entrepreneur, being a taxi driver, were quite high. In the case of Cameo, the costs per vehicle are much lower because, first of all, the purchasing price. Second of all, they did not really actually purchase, they would just get it leasing from the bank. And overall, the company could organize the financials in a much different way, and the price of the service could be much lower, even though the service was of much higher quality. And of course, everybody liked to drive in Cameo. And then over time, one or two other companies arrived in this way. And then later on, even the original taxi association changed a little bit the way they do business. So I think I'm talking about this because it's important to understand the difference between the two business models. So the old business model, each one has its own car, costs are very high, but because you're a monopoly, you can charge high prices. The new business model, Cameo, has different reasons why they can offer a much lower price at much higher service, and obviously they're much, much more competitive. So you can see there a little bit about the difference between the two business models of these two organizations. And then, of course, a few years after that, we had another competitor on the market with a completely different business model. This time, this was a global company. And of course, I'm sure many of you are familiar with that. It was, of course, Uber. So when Uber came, again, completely different business model. They do not have their own cars at all. They use what is called a sharing economy, and of course there are many problems with Uber, with the regulators, etc., etc. But certainly then, as well as today, they have again different business model. Hello? Sorry?
Petra. We have to mute Petra.
Okay. I thought Petra wanted to ask something.
No.
Okay.
She wasn't muted.
Okay, so you can see here actually 3 different kinds of business models in the same industry. So we're not talking only about business models in software, but also in any practically industry. And I will try and go through 2 or 3 other examples of businesses that really had a huge change in the business model. But the same thing usually happens, that for some reason or other the new business model is more competitive and the customers are very interested. So I will take us now in this session into the long time way history, so back to the early 20th century. At the time, there was a huge change in the business model of providing electrical energy or power. Of course, this was driven by innovations from a very famous guy born in Croatia. His name was Nikola Tesla. And he invented this whole series of inventions that basically enabled electrical power to be transmitted over large distances. Until then, it was very difficult, or you would have a huge loss of the power if you tried to send it over a long distance. So the business model of electrical energy was that if you had a factory and you wanted electricity, you had to basically buy the power plant. So companies like Westinghouse and others, they were building power plants for each customer. So one customer, one power plant, and they would make the money by selling the power plant, selling basically the whole machinery and the equipment. They bring it to their factory, or maybe they bring it to the neighborhood, and then the city buys one per neighborhood. Of course, it's all ancient history, and we're not, used to that anymore. But however, when Tesla came along with his business partners, they invented the whole concept of providing electrical energy as a service. So this is the way that most of us use it today. We don't have a power plant in our backyard. We just have the plug, and we plug in our laptop, and we have the electricity. And then we pay for the electricity per usage. So, and of course we're all quite used to that, but it was not always like that. So this is another example of a completely different industry where things were changed by a different business model. Of course, almost always these business models are enabled by technology. So in the case of taxis, it wasn't necessarily car technology, but Uber was using the technology of the internet, the mobile applications, to provide the feature that you can see your taxi coming through the city, where is it now, he tells you exactly when it's arriving, all those things that we are quite used to. So the technology in that case of software was enabling a car service company like Uber to provide a completely different service. In the case of electrical energy, it was of course a new technology of creating, generating and distributing electricity. And then another example from history, again a very, very famous and popular brand is called McDonald's. So when McDonald's came on the market, basically for a family to eat out in the United States, a middle class family let's say, they had 2 options. They could go to a very cheap diner and have a dinner which was not very nice, but okay, at least they don't have to make it at home. Or they could go to an expensive restaurant. The dinner would be very nice, but it would be very, very expensive. So McDonald's said to the customers, you can come to McDonald's, you can have a nice meal, the quality will always be the same if you're in New York, in Illinois, or Texas, or California. You can be sure that it's safe, tasty, and it doesn't cost very much. And so we had this, the first examples of fast food. Today it's very much identified with the idea of junk food, but at that time it was actually democratizing eating out. So eating out at the time when McDonald's was created became something accessible all of a sudden to millions of customers, and that was the driver behind the growth of McDonald's. So again, different business model. And then we can talk about, of course, Netflix or HBO, so streaming, which is conquering the media world, but I'd like to not dwell on that too much, but I'd like to take you to the next slide, and this is about a shop. So in this slide you can see a shop, a grocery shop in Croatia, and you can see different porches in the shop where we have salt. So if you look at the slide, at the bottom of the slide there are just boxes of salt in 1 kilo. packaging, and as you move up and up, you can see that the salt is packaged in smaller and smaller packages. And on the top shelf, you can see that there are some colors. So underneath, it's all blue and white. And on the top shelf, you can see something green, something orange, etc. So today, when you come to the shop, we see different kinds of salt. Himalaya salt, this salt with kinds of herbs added and things like that. And if you look carefully at the very top shelf, all the way to the right, is something called the flour of salt, fleur de sal. And fleur de sal is a salt that is picked up from the sea in a special way. People who are very enthusiastic about food appreciate it very much. And as you can see, it's in a small package and it's much more expensive than 1 kilo of ordinary salt. So when I have an interactive session with students in the classroom, I usually ask them to try and guess what is the difference in price between the cheapest salt down, all the way down, and the most expensive salt all the way on the top shelf to the right. So in this case, I don't have students, but I have Marko. So I will put Marko on the spot and completely surprise him and ask him, Marko, in your opinion, could you guess, without looking at the next slide, what is the difference in price between the most expensive and the least expensive salt in this one shop?
15 times?
15 times. Well, many students will guess 10 times, 20 times. Actually, the difference in price is 100 times. So the flour of salt costs 50 euro per kilo, and the kilo of salt costs €0.5 per kilo. So food enthusiasts will say that they only use for the really nice food, but I would guess that probably 99% of students in any of my classrooms could not really taste the difference if somebody put one or another kind of salt on the table. And this is all an example of also a different business model, because the marketing and the packaging and the way it's produced is different for the expensive salt. But it's also a good example of what people are willing to pay if they perceive the product to be better. So it's not just always a question of objective taste. It's very often a question of perception. What will people pay for a premium product in any category? In software, in automobiles, in clothing, depending on how much they appreciate the product itself. I don't have a slide here, but another example I use with my students is this kind of headphones, which are made by Sennheiser. And it's the most expensive set of headphones in the world. It costs 60,000 euros for headphones. There is also an amplifier which is the same price. But then we can discuss who would want to pay and why would they have to pay, etc. So these are all examples of different business models, and we'll use a few more later, but I'd like to continue now and to talk about the structure actually of the business model. So very quickly, in this picture here, you see a guy on the left side called Alexander Osterwalder. He is a Swiss teacher and business consultant who basically invented something called the business model canvas, and the whole. But I won't talk too much about the guy. Just a quick photo so you can see what he looks like. But let's now go into the business model itself. So basically, the business model describes the key elements of your business and how they are interconnected. You could basically make an analogy with, let's say, a mechanical part. In that case, the business model would be like the design drawing, mechanical design drawing for that part, which will describe exactly how the parts fit together, what goes where, what comes in, what goes out, etc. So more like a mechanical process or a business process than just like a static picture of your business, which is usually what the business plan is. So we'll talk about several important components of the business model. One is customer segmentation. We could use very, very different words or expressions for that, but basically it means that you need to really, really understand who is your customer. So going back to the example of the salt, the company making the flour of salt for 50 euros per kilo is very, very specifically targeting niche customers. So they're not selling it to me because I don't buy that salt. I'm not that crazy about the super premium food. But the people who go to an expensive restaurant, who are super, it's extremely important to them. Obviously, they have a little bit more money than the average guy. So if you look at the company doing that, they will know quite well what is the way of those people, how are they thinking, what are their preferences, and then they can basically adapt their communications to invite them to buy the product. A nice example I like to use is a very simple one. It's candy. So if you're selling candy, it's usually more the younger people, the kids who are interested in candy. And if you think about who you need to market or sell that candy to, basically you have two customers that you need to convince both of them. So first of all, you have to make the kid want to buy that candy. So you will put the advertisements in the morning, in Saturday morning, there are cartoons, or on some channel that only has cartoons, or in comic strips or other places, to create an interest from the children that they want to buy your bubblegum or your candy or whatever you're selling to children. Or toys, same example. On the other hand, you also have to convince the parents, because the parents are the ones who have a pocketbook, and they have to feel comfortable about buying that candy for the kids, so they have to somehow be convinced perhaps that it's not as much sugar, that it's not that it's a little bit healthier, or at least less harmful to your health. But basically, that's a very simple example. If you want to sell one product, you need to convince two types of customers, both of them, that they will be interested in buying your product. So for all the entrepreneurs watching this, it's a very, very important piece, and perhaps Marko will also touch on this, because I know they did very, very thoughtful and deep customer development when their customer analysis, when they were building the business of Repsol. Now, once you have kind of defined your customers, you have to think about how you're going to talk to them. Basically, the whole process about communicating with your customers, you could call it building a relationship. Ideally, you want your customers to have an attachment to your product. They want you to prefer their product, so when they come to the shop and they see 5 different products, or when they want to go out to a restaurant, they say, oh, this is my favorite restaurant. It doesn't have to be the most expensive one. In every category of restaurants, there are restaurants that are people's favorites. So it doesn't have to be the elite restaurant, it can also be the takeout, it can be street food, but there are also street food restaurants where people are really attached to them and really like to go there, and they tell their friends. So when you think about who your customers really are, then you think about where can I reach them? What are they reading? Where are they on the internet? What do their friends like? And then, of course, also after they purchase your product, depending on the product, you may want to continue and have an ongoing conversation with them about the product and about what it does for them and how it works. Now, hopefully you identified your customers well, and you know who they are, and you have a good discussion and communication with them. Then the next step is you really need to sell to them, because as entrepreneurs, of course, your business has to make money. So it can be a successful business and it can grow, or maybe if you don't want to build a huge business, just have a stable business, still it has to be supported with the cash coming into the business, which means you have to have a way to sell your product to the customers, and you have to have a way to distribute it to the customers. If you're building software like Repsol, then the distribution is basically over the internet, but it's not just over the internet. You guys have distributors in various markets, is that correct?
Yeah.
So if your customers could theoretically purchase directly from your websites, why do you have a middleman between you and the users in Indonesia?
Yeah, so we have several different channels basically. We started off with just selling online through some inbound marketing, which means somebody somehow learns about Repsol, gets interested, and then steps into conversation with us, which hopefully ends up with them purchasing the service. But of course, that only a certain type of the customers will go down that route. Some customers simply want more attention, want more nurturing from their vendors, and some customers simply have this a different sales process because they're bigger or smaller or something else is different. So we have at least two more, let's say, channels that we use. One is, as you mentioned, resellers, which means somebody else who is telling about us to our prospects. And then the other one is actually we started creating our own sales force, our own salespeople who would go outbound, search for the customers, and then kind of push in their faces and try to sell reps to them.
While we're at it, can you tell us in just a few sentences, and I'm sure you have perfected this explanation many times, what is actually Repsly? What does your product do?
Yeah, it's a data-driven retail execution platform.
Okay.
Five words. So what
And now
does-
in language that
Yeah.
all people understand.
Yeah, so like the picture that describes 1,000 words. So it's for the people who actually go out in the retail stores or in restaurants or something like that and represent brands. So if I was a company producing wine, I would have my people going out all over Croatia, visiting the stores and making sure that my wine is on the right shelf, making sure that the prices are right, making sure that it exists there, trying to push it in as many stores as is possible. And the same goes for the restaurants, bars, and so on. So these people would be using Repsly, and me as an owner or the sales director, I would be using Repsly as well to communicate with the people there to make sure that everything is according to plan and according to contracts with customers.
So it's actually a cloud service with a mobile app that allows those people in the store to report back to you, so you as an owner can see what's going on and manage the process.
Yeah, it's called software as a service. You mentioned driving as a service or being driven as a service, and plug in the laptop as a service, and we are just promoting products as a service.
Great, thanks, Marko. So as you can see, the sales and distribution strategy of a company can be fairly involved, depending again on what you're selling. So the next component of this business model framework is called the value proposition, and this basically is your way to explain to the customer why is the product important to them, why they should buy it, and why should it be valuable to them. In my experience mentoring companies and teaching at universities and so forth, this is usually quite difficult because companies often create a product and they understand the product so well that they don't see really how they can now explain that to somebody because it's usually very clear to them. But over time, if you really think about it, then that the value is something that you can actually really explain. And if you can explain it clearly, then the customer will be much more easily convinced to buy the product. And finally, in this part of the model, there is something called a revenue stream. So tell us, Marko, how is Repsly priced? How do customers pay?
So I will probably touch on that in my
Okay.
But basically I will touch on the thing that happened with our pricing. So we started off as a simple one price per user, and we've learned
Monthly.
that monthly.
Yeah.
Monthly. So it's a monthly subscription. You have 5 people out in the streets, 5 times something. Then we learned, not every customer gets all the same benefits, so we've kind of put it in several different editions. So you would, for a premium, you would pay a premium price. For a low end of the service, with some basics, you would pay just the entry level price, again per user per month. But again, the customers, large and small, vary in various different ways, and their needs actually are different. So it's easy to talk to a company owner, like myself in that one story and talk me into something. But if I'm actually like on a third level of some company hierarchy and I have to go through some procurement process and through legal and through whatever, then it's a different story. So we price it differently now with some tiers and packages and per activity, and if everything else fails, then we just look at each other in our eyes and come to an arrangement.
Okay, that's always a good alternative. But essentially, you're selling a software as a service with monthly pricing and different variants of that.
Exactly.
So obviously, if you're an entrepreneur and your product is or your product is service like a restaurant selling food, etc., that can be different. But for instance, talking about business models, more and more restaurants are thinking about offering monthly subscription. So you subscribe to their meals, and then you get every once a week or from some time the food that you ordered. But then again, of course, that can be a completely different business model. So depending on the business, the kind of revenue, the way that you make money, the cost of your product can be quite different. Especially if you're creating some kind of software, then you have many different options. And of course, we don't have time to go into that in detail, but again, it's important to, in your business model, to think about what is going to be the revenue, structure of the revenue coming into the company. And obviously, to deliver your product, you have to think about what are the key activities that you have to do, and what are the costs driving those activities. In software, it's, I guess, usually dominantly the cost of the people in your team. And depending on the way the product is structured, it can be a larger or smaller amount of marketing and advertising that you need to do. In businesses that are actually building physical products, it's obviously the price of the machinery and the equipment that you have to make the product, the cost of the materials coming in, again, always the cost of the team that you have, and then again, of course, marketing, etc. So there are different costs that you have to consider for the business. There may or may not be an important partner relationship. Marko mentioned his distributors and resellers. Some businesses are very dependent on media, so they have to be in close touch with media companies and other kinds of organizations. So to do all that, you need some certain resources, and you have to think about what resources are going into that. And from all of that, then finally you get the cost structure. So if you look at the topics that we went through in this part of the session, they're all somehow, let's say, symbolized in this chart here, which is called the business model canvas. And if you would like to do that, then you can find this online in many different versions, and just use it as a little drawing board, or you can just draw over it or put post-its and things like that, just to organize your thoughts around the customers, the segments, the value proposition, etc. Or you can figure out that you really don't need this kind of a chart, and you can just think about these topics yourself. But whichever way you go around it, you're going to probably have to consider all of the aspects of the business that we talked about now, and then it's very important to create them so that they reinforce each other. But that's a little bit more, let's say, involved topic, so we're not going to dive into that today. I have a few more slides, but I'm going to more or less skip over those, because it's by now 6:45, and I'll slowly go towards the end of the presentation and then transition over to Marko. But just to end, these are a few books that you may want to look at if you're thinking about that. I know some of them are very familiar to Marko, Steve Blank and Eric Ries. They are pretty much oriented toward technology and software startups, but again, each book can also be relevant regardless of the business that you are in. You just have to kind of think about the model itself and adapt it to your own business. So that's the first part of the session. Thanks very much for listening, for your attention, and I'm assuming, Mariana, that you don't have yet any comments or questions in the chat room.
Not for now.
Not now. Okay, that's fine. So I will now hand over to Marko, and Marko, if you need me as a bouncing board, I'm at at your disposal.
Thank you. I
Yes.
want to do that.
Definitely.
Let's
Okay.
switch places.
Yes, absolutely.
Right. A short break until we defeat the technology.
I think you can manage.
It's a never-ending battle.
Yep.
Yep, we may win the war, but not the battle. We always lose the battle.
All right. So thanks. So the next, basically, just the continuing of what Ivo was talking about, which is just getting your heads around how to structure the business, who to get money from and how to feed your family. Like the execution part of that business is somewhat the product development, although it goes in rounds and rounds, as I will show you briefly. So, there's one definition that I really liked. It was like, what is the product development altogether? What is it all about? Because it's about several different aspects. It's about succeeding with your product, basically. Making sure you succeed. And to do that, you need the right product, which is like, let's not build something that's very nice, beautiful, and nobody wants to buy. That product needs to be done right, which means let's not do something that everybody will buy, but it's so crappy that nobody is going to give you money for that. And then managed right, which means, well, you also need to somehow make a business out of it, which, continue doing that and manage it as it goes on, because it's not like you do it once and then you're done and then you just collect money. You have to continue, and basically this management of the process of the whole product development process is really crucial to continue as a successful story. So I'm going to use one analogy here. I like to do that because I think it's rather important. Being a little boy as I am, I of course I find cannons always amusing, and when we talk about cannons, we always talk about how big is it, how far can it shoot, and so on, how accurate it is, and that could be like a metaphor for a business plan. So you need obviously people, you need machinery, you need staff to actually execute, but you also need other things. So how do you shoot a cannon? So you first have to aim at the target. This is an important part. After aiming, you shoot, and hopefully you
Hit the target.
you hit the target. So what I very often see happening is we talk about how far can it shoot and so on. How accurate? Well, I don't know. So so that's rarely something that's been talked about. And then to bring it back to the business, to get out of this war talk and all of that, and get back to the business, it's about how can I make my business sustainable? How can I basically feed my family, feed other people's families off of it? So there are basically two things that we would say about the product development, like the business, building our service, and which is like the discovery and delivery phase, which are not two distinct phases, but they basically go round and round in circles all the time. And I would say discovery phase, you can Google that, that's why I use those terms. The discovery would be to understand where the opportunity is. And this is something where the business model canvas and everything comes into place, to understand what the market is, who would be willing to buy some service or some product from us. If we want to open a bakery, where do we open it? Obviously not next to 10 other bakeries. That would be a really tough decision to make, to execute on that. And then the delivery is basically executing on that idea. Why does it go? As I mentioned here, it's iterative. It's iterative because we get some plan, and why actually the whole thick business plans were abandoned, because you put it in a drawer and it does nothing. You cannot iterate on that because you don't have time to actually iterate on that. This is where the whole idea of the business canvas came from, is to have something that's roughly good enough. It's good to start off something. You start off something, you understand as time passes that half of the things have been bad, half of the things you missed, and the other half actually you have got right. So you're able to quickly iterate on your business canvas, and you can actually make sure that as you go after some business opportunity, you actually, as you deliver something, you aim again. And this is where I get back to the cannon example. You shoot out something like that, and you see where you got it. Probably you've missed for the first time, but you know that you could kind of navigate it a little bit differently. And then you aim again, you aim again, you aim again. And this is in the center of the agile manufacturing and all of the agile processes that have been going on. This is the recognition basically that we cannot get it right when we start. We cannot get it right the first time. We actually have to get something out first time, then reiterate over that, reiterate and discover. So one of the things is, like deciding what are we going to offer to our customers. This is like deciding on what's the market, and the market basically, what is it? It could be somewhat traditionally, it's like the demographic or some, we are targeting these customers, these companies that are producing wine. So let's say that's our market, or somebody else is targeting customers that do promotions in the field, something like that. But there are also other ways to look at it. So let me get back to the flour of salt example. Would you ever buy it?
Not quite sure. I would probably buy it to try it.
Would you buy it as a present?
That's more likely. If I was visiting somebody who I know will really appreciate that.
It's like, or Bayadera, for example. I would never buy it for myself, but I always buy it for present to others.
Okay, there you go.
So, Bayadera is a chocolate, and I like to give it out as a present. So, the market actually is not, like static, a person or a company or something like that. It's like a combination of a person in a situation trying to do something, trying to achieve something. So, the flour of salt could be a perfect present for maybe half of your friends, and you start using that, and that becomes predictable. Some people just know which wine I'm going to give to them because that's how it goes. So that's one thing. To get it, of course, all my experiences in the software industry, but that's by far not the only industry, and we as a company work in various other industries. And these are all the product development is like a general purpose tooling, and it would go for any other branch. So here I'll kind of put out some photos of a restaurant or a bakery or software industry. It all is possible. It's possible to actually use some product development techniques on any kind of market. So, for example, children daycare or nurturing the elderly people or hairdressing. Recently there's this subscription model for the razors. And it always is about question, nobody would probably buy razors as a subscription model unless you are in a position that you need it. And the same goes for anything else. When I was a student, I was giving lectures from math and physics. That's like per usage. Education as a service, per usage pricing model. But I was actually looking for a subscription model because I wanted to offer some kind of steady stream of education for a steady stream of money. And that was my goal. So yeah, the service definitely can be defined in various different ways. So the market can be defined not only statically, but also to understand what's the dynamic that they're trying to achieve. And it also can be defined by some decisions such as pricing and so on. So product discovery and customer development. This is basically not a product discovery, opportunity discovery basically. That's what I wanted to put out. The first kind of step, going back to the canon, is aiming. And to aim, there are several tools available to us, and these things actually change over time. Customer development, you mentioned previously, the Lean Startup and for Step to Epiphany. These are like evergreens in the area, and it comes down to actually understanding that even though it starts off with an idea, if we are going to make a business out of it, we're doing that business to bring money back to our home, to our family. Sometimes if we need co-workers, of course we need to feed them, their family as well. So we need some strong business reasoning to actually go after our idea. And the whole thought about and the whole thought behind the customer development is actually to start off with an idea and then pay close attention to how customers react to that, and then actually re-aim and re-aim and re-aim and do that in a loop so that we can basically bit by bit precisely put our service to something that actually brings value to customers. It may not be something that we are super strongly in love with, or it may be. So that definitely is not the most important thing when we are starting some kind of business. All right. So what I wanted to round up this part around the discovery phase, what to Google, what to look for, business model canvas, definitely something really interesting. Then I already mentioned customer development as a process of iteratively delivering something, observing the feedback from the customers, and then adjusting based on that feedback, and actually repositioning the product in a way that actually has some market potential. Jobs to be done. That's a really interesting, basically theory that really describes and gives some concrete recipes on how to understand where the opportunity is, even in a market that one is not so familiar. So if I was deciding I want to go into restaurant business, I may be able to actually use jobs to be done theory to understand how that business works and to actually understand, oh, I don't want to go into cevapcici or like heavy meat or hard lunches industry. I may want to go after the exclusive, like the salt, flour of salt. I could go in some exclusive, basically niche, or I could go in some other direction. And this is where actually it helps a lot. And opportunity discovery is basically a synonym around all of that. There are, of course, other things you will stumble upon while looking at those things. So how does one product development cycle looks like, and what it is actually? So that's definitely this execution phase of every so after basically deciding on what to do, what to go after, we execute on that. And one thing to make sure is, one should actually be mindful about making their own mistakes and not relying on an idea, because ideas are not proven. Ideas are just like the starting point. We may have hopes about where the end point is, but these two are quite, that there's probably tens of years in between the idea and the end goal. So to approach that, we definitely want to make sure that while we are walking in some way, we can always, periodically take a look back and make sure that we are still on the right path.
But should we be worried about making mistakes or afraid to make mistakes?
No. It depends how you actually structure the way you execute on your idea. If I was to claim that my idea is so perfect and that I am going to work hard now for 10 years and then show it to the world, I would need to be afraid. I would better be afraid.
Yeah.
Because there's, there's some chance of success and there's some definitely no way it's gonna work out based only on an idea. If nothing else, then then by the time I deliver that, the idea is already 10 years old. So the whole world has moved. If on the other hand, and thank you actually for this question, because it clearly shows why this approach is good. If on the other hand, I would be able to make one single step and then look back and make sure, I'm still on track, that's good, like hiking somewhere in the mountains, like with each step you make sure that you are still on the path and you're not somewhere falling off the cliff or something.
But in the business, where is this feedback coming from? How do you know if your step was in the right direction?
Yeah, so that's like the customer development part of the story. Why is it called customer development? It's because first you work with your customers, you offer something, you get some attention from somebody. If you don't, then you change something until you get something. Let's call that person a customer, that company a customer. They will give you some feedback, they will give you something in return. And then first you can change your product so it better suits your needs. Or you could actually discover that there's a whole group of other customers that you haven't even thought about to start with that are even better to pursue. For example, somebody may go on a faculty to become a sports physician or something like that, but then discover that it's actually so much better for the business to do that same thing for the dogs, or pets in general, or for elderly people or something like that. So That would be customer development. And this person probably would start off somewhere, see for themselves, this is, it's semi-working, it's partly working, and then keep the thing that is working and remove the thing that isn't working. And that's in the, one of the Google bets of me is the agile product development and the minimum viable product. And that is exactly structuring the whole company to work in such way that enables us to build something for 1 week, for 2 weeks delivery, and then reiterate, and reiterate. If I was to open a bakery, I probably wouldn't start off with 100 things on my menu. I would start off with a few. Then one idea maybe, let's just try the sweet stuff or the salty stuff, and then this is where you actually are looking for some kind of customer segment. You may end up understanding that during the morning it's better to have some salty things because people actually visit me, the working people buying something for themselves because they're going to the work. But then in the afternoon something sweet is better because it's us parents driving our kids to solfeggio or violin or something like that. And we just want to stuff something in them, and they refuse anything that's not sweet. So we would go.
I can see you had some discussions with your kids about that.
Everything. So these are the things. I don't know if we will share these slides, but I've put up some of these things to Google forward. And yeah, that's it from me.
Thanks so much, Marko. So. I guess we could say that combining the ideas of the business model structuring and the thoughts you had about product development and customer development, hopefully some of our entrepreneurs can somehow get a good idea about how to apply that to the business they're thinking about. So it can be in different ways probably applied to almost any business that some of them have. I know I read a book by Seth Godin many years ago, and he was talking about a bakery in Paris and how this bakery in Paris is so popular that many people consider it to be the best bakery in the world. So they send some of their products like bread, they send it to Japan by plane because in Japan they want to buy it from the bakery. So they are obviously based there, at least reading this book, base their competitiveness on just the quality of the product. It's so good that everyone talks about it, books they write about them, etc. So doesn't mean that every business has to try to have the best in the world, but that can be one approach. And probably I would guess that the guys in that bakery, they took some feedback from the customers when they were thinking about their products. And maybe at some point they tried something different and tried to put a high price. And I'm just guessing all of this, I don't know for sure, but the customer said, this is so good that I'm willing to pay more. And probably they then kind of try to iterate their products to kind of get to this position that they're now very well known for. So basically what I'm trying to say by this example is, I'm pretty sure that this session will be watched even now or later on by entrepreneurs thinking about different types of businesses. You and I are both from the technology industry and the software industry, but maybe some people want to open a street food restaurant, maybe somebody wants to sell some kind of clothes that are specially designed, and then it's always for us as people holding the workshop and mentoring our students, it's always interesting to try and apply these concepts that are coming from the technology industry to very different businesses.
I mean, they came in technology industry from automotive.
From automobile manufacturing, exactly. So yeah. Well, I guess I think that's it for today's session. Marko, thanks very much for joining us. Again, thanks to the Youth Initiative for Human Rights for hosting us, and to Mariana for being here as the invisible woman behind the scenes. Petra for the introduction, and to all partners who are supporting the project. And we'll see you in the next session.
Tuesday.
Next Tuesday.
It will be incorporation and PR for entrepreneurs.
Oh, so starting the company and NPR.
Yes.
Okay, so to just summarize, I'm not sure how well you heard Mariana. So in our next session, next Tuesday, Mariana will talk about how to start your company, what is the legal options, the legal entities, etc. And then Marusia Stamac will talk about communicating. So communication is very important. Okay, thanks then to Marko and to everybody, and see you next time.
Thank you for joining.